Wine Stories, a podcast to discover the world of wine by Étienne Pommier.
Hello everyone! For this new episode of Wine Stories, I propose you a journey in two parts to discover the wines of the Loire from its source to its estuary. In this first episode, we will taste the bubbles and the dry white wines talking about Balzac, the Three Musketeers and Robinhood. And in a second podcast, we shall explore rosés, red wines, as well as the great sweet wines from the Loire. I hope you enjoy it. Of all the wine regions in France, the Loire Valley is undeniably the most stretched out and the most original in its diversity. From its source, in the center of France, the stream runs north and becomes a wild river flowing through the canyons of the Massif Central. As the slope softens, the Loire gets wider around Nevers, and its volume doubles after the confluence with the Allier. Around Orléans, the river turns west towards Tours and becomes wide and majestic thanks to its tributaries, the Cher, the Indre and the Vienne. Eventually, it reaches Nantes and the Atlantic Ocean, 1,006 kilometers far from its source, which makes it the longest river in France. All along the way, the Loire runs through many wine regions, and the landscapes and climates change as the river flows. From the Côtes du Forez to Sancerre, from Berry to Nantes via Touraine and Anjou, the Loire Valley is one of the most diverse regions in terms of terroirs and grape varieties, as well as styles of wine. From sparkling to rosé wines, dry whites to light or full-bodied red, as well as sweet wines, the Loire Valley produces a very wide range and offers curious and passionate wine lovers a great playground to explore between historical producers and new domains, benchmark wines and surprises. Loire vintners, including my own grandfather Gérard Pommier, have always walked the line between preserving their traditions and shaking things up when necessary to bring life to the region's vineyards. A region incredibly diverse, but always with the river as its common thread. And in order to experience Loire Valley wines, I propose you to start pampering your taste buds with some bubbles. The Loire Valley is the second region in France for the production of AOP sparkling wines after Champagne, thanks to appellations such as Vouvray, Saumur, or Crémant de Loire. But this production isn't new at all. Ackermann, Saumur's oldest winehouse, started making bubbles in 1834, and its flagship brand, Royal, was launched on the market in the 1850s, about a decade before Moët & Chandon's Brut Imperial. Most Loire Valley sparkling wines are made using the traditional method. After a first fermentation to obtain a base white wine, typically from Chenin Blanc or Chardonnay, the wine is bottled with added sugar and yeasts to go through a second fermentation. In Champagne, the bottles sleep in underground chalky cellars beneath Reims or Épernay. On the banks of the Loire, the cellars are made of another kind of limestone, tuffeau, that allows them to quietly mature and acquire their sparkle. Tuffeau is this creamy white stone, both very resistant and easy to carve, that was used by the master craftsmen of the past to build the wonderful chateaux of Chambord, Chenonceau or Cheverny. Typically gentler and slightly less complex than Champagnes, Loire Valley sparkling wines display charming notes of white flowers and orchard fruits, as well as a lively freshness that makes them lovely aperitif wines. If Chenin's aromas of quince and acacia blend nicely with the toasted and brioche flavors induced by the yeast autolysis, this match doesn't quite achieve the same finesse as the best champagnes. A few vintners from Montlouis-sur-Loire understood this 25 years ago and started experimenting with the ancestral method in order to preserve Chenin's fruit purity. It was the times of the first pet nats, the famous pétillant naturel or naturally sparkling wines. But unlike many of the cuvées that have emerged on the market since, with sometimes a shaky balance or peculiar off-tastes, the Montlouis wines were made by determined and talented winemakers, such as the famous Jacques Blot and his 000 cuvée. 0 chaptalization, 0 tirage, and 0 dosage. For 15 years, this chiseled wine with nuances of pear and flintstone contributed, alongside other cuvées by the likes of Lisenbertrand-Jousset or Lagrange-Tiffen, to convince both the public and the authorities that this innovative, yes ancestral style deserved its own appellation. It's now done with the launch of the Montlouis-sur-Loire Pétillant Originel AOP in 2019. The only difference with pet nats? The wines have to be disgorged. There are also sparkling roses in the Loire, but few people know that some sparkling red wines are also made, taking advantage of Cabernet Franc's freshness and lifty notes of raspberry and rhubarb to make lovely wines. You want proof? Why don't you try the sparkling Cabernet Franc from Château de Miniat in Touraine? Jacques Hiblot passed away in May 2023, but he leaves behind him the memory of his enthusiasm that keeps energizing the Loire Valley, a terroir particularly famous for its white wines. If you cross the bridge of Pouilly-sur-Loire, you will happen to be at exactly halfway between the river's source and mouth, and this is where start the first great white vineyards of the Loire. The first mentions of vines in Sancerre and Pouilly date back to the 6th century, and the whole central region, including the areas of Quincy, Reuilly, and Maine-tout-Salon, has been covered in vines since the Middle Ages. Nowadays, the lord of these lands is Sauvignon Blanc, and the terroirs that symbolize the nobility of its lineage are Sancerre and Pouilly. Only 15 kilometers away from one another, both villages share the same climate, and the wine's character in both these appellations is mainly function of their terroir differences. Located on a rocky outcrop overlooking the river, the village of Sancerre sits on a fault line, which created a geological patchwork that we can categorize in three main types of soils: the caillottes, the terre blanche, and the chailloux. Caillottes are very rocky limestone terroirs that heat rapidly under the sun and bring Sauvignon Blanc to ripen rather early, giving sharp and elegant wines with intense varietal notes of citrus and boxwood. In Sancerre, this is the terroir of La Moussière by Alphonse Mello or the Chêne Marchand by Domaine Pinard, and it can also be found in Pouilly in cuvées like L'Écrise by Loïc Caillebourdon. Terre blanche, or white soils, are Kimmeridgian calcareous marls similar to the ones in Chablis, and easily recognizable to the fossilized oyster shells that can be seen on the surface. On these clayey soils, colder and more humid, Sauvignon Blanc has a longer hang time and gives more concentrated grapes. The wines are broad and intense with a great aging potential, but often tight in their youth with a remarkable complexity of Meyer lemon and verbena with nuances of linden and white flowers, as well as a saline finish. Some of the best wines from this terroir originate from the famous Mont-Blanc slope in Chavignol, made by producers such as Gérard Boulet, François Cotta, or Anne Vatan in the very rare Clos-la-Néor. In Pouilly, this type of terroir can also be found in some cuvées such as Luminance by Didier Jonathan Pabiot. Finally, the chailloux are silica-rich clayey soils with flintstones that require enough slope to drain rainwater since they are so dense. They produce mid to full-bodied wines, both rich and vibrant, with aromas of hawthorn and spices, as well as the famous gunpowder note that made the reputation of the village, and gave its name to the appellation, Blanc Fumé de Pouilly, or Pouilly Fumé. The iconic wine of this kind of terroir is obviously the Silex, created by Didier Dagneau. This vigneron, like no other, managed to bring back Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc under the spotlights, producing authentic Grand Crus, and his son Louis Benjamin is now in charge of the famous Saint-Andelin estate. In Sancerre, the same finesse and intensity can be found at Domaine Vacheron, in single vineyard wines such as Les Romains or Le Pavé. All these premium sites, giving wines of exceptional quality, speak to the greatness of Loire Valley Sauvignon Blanc. Between Orléans and Tours, Sauvignon is still planted, but quietly shies away approaching the royal castle of Amboise as if to make space for another king, Chenin Blanc. Native to the Loire, the dominion of the variety once called Pinot de Loire starts in Montlouis, on the limestone tuffeau soils of Touraine and Saumur. From the opposite banks of the river, Vouvray and Montlouis look at each other in a rather sterile rivalry, for these two appellations share way too many common points not to work together for the greater good. Ask Montlouis-based François Chiden his opinion on the matter. He, who was forced to declassify his Vouvray wines in Vin de France because he vinifies them 3 kilometers outside the appellation's boundaries. But the truth is in the glass, for, beyond the petty quarrels, the wines of Vouvray and Montlouis both display a range unheard of anywhere else in the region. Chenin is a temperamental grape that ripens unevenly, and it is common to find berries at different maturity stages within the same bunch. This characteristic explains why the wines are sometimes bone dry and razor sharp, and sometimes more tender with a touch of residual sugar coating the fruit. Chenin doesn't let anyone tell him what to be. He tells the vigneron the style of wine it wants to be vintage after vintage. In the tempered climate of Touraine, deeply rooted in the same tuffeau the wine cellars are carved into, Chenin shows a delicate profile with subtle flavors of quince, Williams pear and Manuka honey. Always structured by that fine line of acid that gives great longevity to the wines. In fact, the late Gaston Huet was known for tricking his visitors, pouring them a glass of 1959 or maybe 1947 that they would invariably assess 20 years younger than it actually was. In the cave dug by his grandfather, Maurice Alias keeps bottles dating back to the early 20th century. And for me, I remember a memorable tasting with journalist Perico Legas tasting dry white wines from Domaine Roland Moreau near Azelrido. 1983, 1976, these wines were still showing a surprising energy after 40 or 50 years, even though they didn't come from the finest vineyards in the area. To savor the essence of dry Chenin in Vouvray, you may visit historical estates such as the Clonaudin of the Forez family or the heirs of François Pinon. You should also pay a visit to more recently arrived but no less talented vintners such as Vincent Carême. In Montlouis, La Taillelou and François Chiden are the leading lights of a dynamic appellation, with younger producers making a name for themselves such as Xavier Weisskopf at the Rocher des Violettes. As we continue heading downstream, we reach the postcard village of Camp-Saint-Martin, overlooking the confluence between the Loire and the Vienne to enter the Saumur area. These clayey calcareous terroirs have much in common with Touraine appellations, and vintners such as Romain Guiberteau or Antoine Foucault craft on these lands white wines of great purity and saline minerality. But after Saumur, the geology changes completely, and with it, the character of the Chenin as we arrive in Anjou. Milady de Winter knew exactly what she was doing when she tried to poison D'Artagnan with Anjou wine in the Three Musketeers. Famous since the Middle Ages, the terroir of Anjou and its mild climate, described with such poetry by Joachim du Bellay, is a great land for white wines. Here, schist and slate have replaced tuffeau, giving wines of greater volume and power than anywhere else in the Loire Valley. Unlike Touraine wines, that have always been served and praised locally in the many chateaux of the valley, Anjou wines have earned their reputation on export markets thanks to their location on the river, closer to the ocean, but also because for a long period of time, Anjou was the heart of English presence in France. Stronghold of the Plantagenet dynasty, where King Richard I is entombed in Fontevraud Abbey, this is the famous Richard Lionheart from Robin Hood. Anjou and its wines grew in fame through the trade routes towards England and the Netherlands. The main terroir in the region is Savenière, and its neighbour, the Roche-aux-Moines. On these schist slopes overlooking the river, Chenin Blanc reveals rich aromas of orchard fruit, jasmine, and star anise in its youth, with velvety, almost unctuous textures and great length. The grape's brisk acidity balances the wines and allows them to age gracefully for 10-15 years, gaining tertiary complexity of honey, beeswax, and dried fruits, which makes them great wines for the table. This is why French gastronome and culinary critic Kurnonsky ranked the Coulet de Serran, a 7-hectare single vineyard in the heart of Savagnières, planted in vine since 1130, amongst the greatest white wines in France, alongside Château d'Yquem or the Montrachet. Coulet de Serran is a very special place, and a potentially superb wine, although often inconsistent. A wine with which I have had as many wonderful memories as bitter disappointments. It is the property of the Joly family, and the patriarch, Nicolas, has done a lot for the development of biodynamics in France. A character as committed and inspiring as he is opinionated, Nicolas Joly has widely promoted since the 1980s this mode of viticulture based on the principles presented by Rudolf Steiner in 1924. Among the vintners who keep on writing a future made of great wines in Savagnières, let me name Éric Morgat, Emmanuel Augereau, or the Domaine aux Moines. As we reach Nantes, the mildly tempered climate of Anjou becomes decidedly maritime, and one can now feel the marine breezes from the Atlantic. The main cultivar here is the Melon de Bourgogne, making the famous Muscadet, but there is still some Folle Blanche planted long ago at the request of Flemish traders who wanted to make spirits. Bottled under the slightly pejorative name of Gros Plan, it has long been limited to making large volumes of diluted, acid-driven wines without much character. However, for a few years now, some producers have decided to try and break this negative image and prove that, even if they are not fine wines, Folle Blanche can make thirst-quenching, energetic cuvées worthy of interest, such as the ones from Domaine Luneau Papin, one of the finest Muscadet producers. Muscadet, or Melon de Bourgogne by its real name, is the soul of this Atlantic wine region that has been undergoing a true revolution over the last generation or so. The geology of the Nantes region is a complex puzzle made of granite, gneiss, and gabbros, more or less covered with layers of sediments that contribute to the diversity of Muscadet wines. Considered non-aromatic, Melon de Bourgogne does have subtle notes of citrus and iodine, as well as a faint floral tone that reminds a little bit of muscat. The grape's quality potential lies in its crisp, mouth-watering acidity, as well as its ability to gain in texture, in harmony, and in complexity with extended lees aging, especially in oak barrels. Wines made in this way bear the mention sur lit, seen on labels of Muscadet Sévremen, Côte de Grandlieu, and Coteaux de la Loire. Since 2011, 10 village denominations have also been created, such as Gorges, Clisson, or Le Palais, requiring longer maturing on lees to give more profound and complex wines. It is now in the hands of the vintners of these new appellations to keep on proving over time that Muscadet can make beautiful terroir-driven wines, following in the footsteps of the likes of Domaine de l'Écu, Jérôme Bretodeau, or Vincent Caillet, who have already paved the way. And here we are, at the end of this first stage of our journey along the banks of the Loire River, discovering the white and sparkling wines that make the bulk of the region's production. In the second episode of this podcast, we will explore the Côtes Rouennaises, taste Sancerre Pinot Noir, and wander around the vines of Bourgueil, Bonzo, or Anjou to freshen up with a glass of rosé and sample the great red and sweet wines of these fascinating vineyards of the Loire.